Good day. My name is Don Green. I'm an attorney in Nevada and California. Principal areas of my responsibility are firearms. We're broadcasting today from Rigel Studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. Many of you may have seen me on other programs produced on the American Guns and Glory Network and by Rigel Studios on firearms laws, litigation, and regulation updates. Today, we're presenting an emergency broadcast because the viewing and listening audience need to be absolutely clear on the proposed regulation regarding arm braces. This is the regulation submitted by the Attorney General of the United States on January 13th, 2023. The regulation is set forth to try to create short barrel rifles out of perfectly legal pistols, which have been defined as pistols prior to the enactment of the regulation. Some of you may clamor about gun control and gun regulation and overregulation and overstepping by the government. But by the end of this program, I'm going to give you some options which you need to consider, and you need to do it right now before the effective date of the regulation takes place in April 2023. May we have slide number 1, please? Before you, you have the front page of the regulation. The regulation is almost 300 pages long. You have to look very carefully in this document, specifically like around page 146, 187, 188, 189, to try to find out, is my weapon legal? So then you have to go to the next volume submitted by the ATF on January 13th, 2023. May we have the second slide? Here is a booklet which is entitled Commercially Available Firearms Equipped with a Stabilizing Brace That Are Short Barrel Rifles. Now, we'll give you an example in just a minute, but I want to let you know something. These weapons were sold as perfectly legal weapons and were defined by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the manufacturers as pistols. When many of these pistols are registered, whether you like that word or not, in the form 4473, there are 3 options for the federal firearms licensee to put in that form. 1, it's a pistol. 2, it's a rifle or shotgun or other. Now, the ATF is probably hanging its hat that these are other, and that as a regulatory agency, it can change the definitions of what it seeks to regulate whenever it wants to, providing that it does go through the Administrative Procedures Act, publish the regulation in the Federal Register for 90 days, receive the notice and comments, favorable or unfavorable, and decide on any changes to the regulation or allow the regulation to stay in place subject to any litigation which is likely to be filed. May we have slide number 3? In front of you, you have what formerly were, according to the regulation, perfectly legal pistols. Now, if you look at the top AR-15 type pistol, you'll see that the brace in the back is fixed to the frame or the plunger. If you remove that stock or that brace, you will not be able to, that weapon will not be able to function because the brace itself is an integral part of the plunger, or, sometimes, you just cannot fire it because it is permanently attached. On the bottom of the slide, you have what's traditionally called a short barrel rifle. Now, if you look at the two, they're cosmetically almost identical. But look at the bottom slide. Do you see that foregrip, which is on the Picatinny rail? That makes the weapon a short barrel rifle. Although if you take it off, it's a pistol. This is the regulation. Now, some of you say, well, wait a minute, the ATF can't make law. Well, if you want to go with that argument, then you're going to be calling me from the Federal Detention Center if you possess these weapons, if the law goes through and you don't take the steps, which I'm going to discuss in just a few minutes. But you see the bottom configuration, the bottom AR-15 type pistol, you see that back brace. Now, if that brace can be shouldered on the weapon, can be shouldered, it is a short barrel rifle. If it can be slid off of the tube, then you're fine, but you still have to take the foregrip off. So you can see in the top example that the tube, which houses the plunger and the spring, is an integral part of the weapon. So you take it off, you can't fire the weapon. In the weapon below, it is a brace which slides over the tube and is fixed to, probably screws in, or there's got to be some kind of a screw underneath which fixes it to the tube, or it's just tight on the tube itself. But you can see that that can be shouldered, but you still have to remove the foregrip, because that foregrip defines the weapon as a short barrel rifle for which you need a tax stamp and register it. May we see slide number 3, please? In slide number 3, you can see that these are the frequently asked questions. And this is for the regulation, which went out 2 weeks ago, but the publication is dated in 2021, specifically August. That was the original date which they targeted to propose this regulation, again, through the Biden administration. And it's the regulation which was proposed did not get finalized in one form until right around November of 2022. The ATF was going to, there were rumors that in December 2022, they were going to propose the regulation. And in part of that, there were some other changes which might have been made. But as you can imagine, as a government entity, they were not satisfied with the original configuration of the regulation, and that is why they proposed the revised regulation, which was filed in the Federal Register on Friday, January 13th, 2023. Let's go to the next slide. Now, what can I do, Mr. Green, if I want to keep my weapon? If your weapon falls into the category of a semi-automatic weapon with a barrel that's less than 16 inches, magazine or box fed, and fires still one round with a single pull of a trigger, but contains a permanent arm brace so that the weapon can be shouldered, you have an NFA weapon. What is an NFA weapon? An NFA weapon is defined under the National Firearms Act. It's called NFA. It was proposed in the 1930s and in late 1968, right after the assassination of Senator Kennedy. And much of that regulation, that act, is still law. There have been some changes to effectively address modern and more modern weapons and different types of weapons. But in the NFA, you must fill out the Form 1 and a Form 4 from the ATF. You fill out who you are, whether it's you or a gun trust, or you're a federal firearms licensee. There are special regulations for you. We'll do another show on that in about a week. And then you fill out the paperwork. You send $200 for the tax stamp, and you wait 12 to 14, up to 18 months. Then you get a decision from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives saying, here's your tax stamp, congratulations, but you can't transfer that weapon, or a silencer, or a short barrel shotgun, or a machine gun, a fully automatic weapon, or, under the new regulation, the short barrel rifle, even though just a few weeks ago, and still now, they are pistols, which are defined as pistols, but not after April 2023. Once you get your tax stamp, you are legal to own it. If you have that weapon and you're out at the range, you really should have a copy of that form with the tax stamp. You should have that in your car. The reason why is that if you are out popping off some rounds and you don't know that you're on Bureau of Land Management land or you're on county land and someone asks you, can I see your tax stamp form? You better have it, because they can seize the weapon, send it to the ATF, and figure it out later that you may have been legally in possession of that weapon. If you do not have the tax stamp, if you've never registered it as an NFA weapon, it is a felony. You face prison time. It's mandatory prison. You face prison time, and you face forfeiture of the weapon itself, plus fine of up to $250,000, according to Title 18 of the United States Code. The tax stamp is $200. You can say, well, wow, that's not a lot of money. The $200 traces its genesis all the way back to the early 1930s, where $200 was the wrath of God. You could buy a house for $400 in the 1930s. So it's a lot of money. And the $200, the tax stamp itself, is still the oldest stamp in circulation in the United States. For over 90 years, it's still the same stamp. It's still $200. Maybe we have the next slide. Oh, let's stay on this slide, please. And under the regulation, here's a so-called amnesty period. Let me clarify this. From Friday, January 13th, 2023, until 90 days later in April of 2023, if you fill out your forms, your Form 1, your Form 4, through a federal firearms licensee, or if you do it yourself, and you submit that form, the $200 is waived. Let me repeat that. If you fill out the NFA form to try to register your former AK or AR type pistol as a short barrel rifle, that $200 is waived. Plus, the old regulation is that before you can possess an SBR, short barrel rifle, you must have the tax stamp. And until you have the tax stamp, you cannot possess that weapon. It's generally held by the federal firearms licensee. So, under this regulation, if you submit your paperwork for your weapon during the 90-day period, which commenced on January 13th, 2013, the government assumes that you are in legal possession of that firearm until you receive word from the ATF. Now, the probability is you're going to get your tax stamp. And a lot of people are claiming, oh, it's gun regulation. It's America taking guns and confiscating guns. Well, if you look at the Form 4473, as was revised in 2020, you will see that the first item on page 1 are the itemization of the weapons to be purchased. The type of weapon, the caliber, the barrel length, the manufacturer. Take a look at it. It used to be like on page 3, but now it's on page 1. That form is kept by the FFL. That registration of that weapon is sent to the ATF. The ATF does a trace on the weapon and finds out who was the last owner of it. So if you bought a new weapon, it's going to be you. If the weapon is stolen and ends up in Keokuk, Iowa in a shooting, well, it was stolen from my home. I did a police report and I'm okay. But if there's no police report, you didn't report that it was stolen, you have a serious problem, especially if it is a short barrel rifle. So I'm going to give you some options in just a minute. So that's why most people are going to get their tax stamp. I expect that there'll be very few seizures of the weapons unless the ATF knows about you, you're refusing to take the arm brace off or disable your weapon, because on the picture that we showed of the two weapons, the one on the top, it is an integral firing part of the weapon. And the ATF says, I believe it's around page 186, 187, 189, where it talks about the tube. It says, if the tube itself is an integral part of the firing mechanism and there is no brace wrapped around it, there's nothing with the Velcro, there's no surface area which would make it amenable to shouldering the weapon, just the short part of the weapon, which is the plunger, is probably not more than the diameter of a quarter, maybe a little bit more. It is exempt and is not part as a short barrel rifle. So long as you have the plunger, you can put the coating on it, I mean the foam on it, you're fine. But the problem is that the weapon that we showed you earlier, the stock is like maybe not welded, but it is on that weapon itself, and it's difficult to remove. And if you remove it, it takes it with the plunger, it renders the weapon inoperable. The ATF doesn't care. It's still an SBR. If you take it off, it's inoperable. May we have the next slide, please? What you have in front of you is what I'm talking about. This is an AR-type generic platform, semi-automatic, magazine-fed pistol, possibly in 5.56 or 300 blackout. And then, of course, you've got, your other people who have other calibers. But you notice the tube in the back. The tube in the back is covered with a foam cover. That tube contains the spring, the recoil spring for the weapon. So if you take that tube off, this weapon cannot be fired. You see what I mean? So this way, the surface area in the back of that tube, maybe a little bit bigger than the size of a quarter, probably not $50, but the size of a quarter, it's not designed to be shouldered. Now, the ATF has also got a laundry list of things which it is looking for, and part of that laundry list is what the manufacturing is offering it as. Are they offering it as a pistol? And what is their advertising? If they're showing advertising and there's these deliverance type guys firing the weapon from the shoulder, although it's a tube, the ATF is going to take that into consideration because that is in the regulation. They're also going to take care of the manual, how to shoulder the weapon, and whether or not, again, the surface area in the back of the tube is conducive to shouldering the weapon for firing purposes. Admittedly, any weapon, a semi-auto, a Derringer, can be shouldered and put on the weapon. I put on the shoulder. It's not very practical, but it can be. So there are some problems with the regulation itself. Maybe see the next slide. Before you, we have a generic AK-47 platform, generally in 7.62 by 39, possibly in 223, which you see some modern builders having this. And this weapon itself right here. And when this AK-47, you understand that the firing mechanism of the AK-47 is unlike the gas operation of AR-15. In the AK-47, the plunger spring is on top of the lower receiver, so that the plunger spring, when it fires, it plunges inside just above the trigger housing. You can pop off the back and pull out the spring. So, but in the back of it is generally a flat surface which may hold a sling, a ring for a sling on many of the variants. In this configuration, the weapon cannot have a stock or a tube because there's no place to put it. There are some configurations of the AK-47 pistol which do have that variation where they can have a stock or a tube. That would probably make this weapon, if it's a long enough tube and it has something at the end of it to create a greater surface area, then that weapon is illegal. And you can see that although this area of this AK-47 is on the left-hand side is probably larger than a quarter, it can be shouldered, but highly impractical. So this weapon, as long as that barrel is less than 16 inches and no other modifications are made to it, this weapon is legal, subject to further regulations which the ATF is proposing or has proposed to try to get to imports for these types of weapons. May we have the next slide? Now, let's go through this regulation again. The ATF, this is an ATF proposed rule digest. I'm trying to digest almost 200 pages of regulations, almost 300 pages of regulations, plus the commercially available manual, plus the frequently asked questions, plus the National Firearms Act form, all of which have been published in the past few weeks. Here is the bottom line. Number one, you can surrender the weapon to the ATF. Probably not a lot of people are going to do it because there are other options. Number two, register the weapon as a short barrel rifle. A lot of people say this is gun control. Well, we've had gun control in this country for almost 90 years. Machine guns, short barrel shotguns, short barrel rifles, fully automatic weapons have always been subject to greater regulation by the government. So if you take the step to register as an SBR, you've already done the, if you bought it from a firearms dealer, you probably already filled out the form 4473. And if you have not got in trouble in the meantime, the probability is you're going to receive your tax stamp. So you want to pay $200 and register your rifle or pistol, or do you want to go to jail? So what can I also do, Mr. Green? Well, number three, you can remove the stock and destroy the stock, or safe keep the removable stock. You know, go to Boulder City. And for people that don't know here, get a storage unit in Boulder City in your sister's name. Throw away, put the removable stock in there, throw the key out in the lake so you can't get to it, and then you come back to Las Vegas. It's not readily accessible to you. Now that sounds ridiculous, but that is an option. And as to this particular thing, when it says remove or destroy, you can also go buy an upper receiver of more than 16 inches in length, put it on your weapon, and it has no problem. It is no longer a short barrel rifle. It no longer falls under the regulation. It is now a rifle, which defeats the purpose of why you want it in the first place. Number four, destroy the weapon per the ATF regulations. Now, when you destroy a weapon, you got to cut it up pursuant to regulation. You can't just, cut it up and throw it away. I don't ever recommend that. The worst scenario I could recommend is sell it to a gun dealer who has an FFL, and he or she will probably put a stock on it or register it, or when somebody buys it, they will register it as a short barrel rifle. Here's a very important point, and this is where our regulatory framework shows that the government was working day and night. They just not come up with this several hundred pages of regulations overnight. In December 2022, actually in November and December 2022, the variant of this earlier regulation was going to be published, but it wasn't. In that regulation, under that maze of definitions and court rulings and comments about comments they have received, the ATF withdrew this regulation and withdrew the Form 4999. What was that form? That form was a checklist of the things that you could assign a number up to 0 to 4. And at the end of this laundry list on pages 1 and 2, if you had more than 4, you had 4 or more points, guess what? It's a short barrel rifle. And there are darn few people who could have got a 4 or less. It was impractical unless you had that tube at the end of your your AR type pistol, or you had a true AK-47 variant, which had no arm brace or no way to place an arm brace on the back of it, which is, it's very popular that way. What is the basis of this regulation? Part of the basis of this regulation is they're saying that some recent mass shootings, defined as 4 or more people, in some of those, according to the ATF, short barrel rifles were used. Well, that's incorrect. At that time, they were pistols. And the ATF puts those words short barrel rifles, I can only say to inflame the public, to satisfy the needs of the administration, to satisfy the needs of the gun grabbers, without looking at the prior regulation, which declared that these weapons are pistols. It's the same thing with the bump stock. Although the bump stock assists in the firing mechanism, as does the forced reset trigger, my basic argument is not a Second Amendment argument. It's not, the government regulation argument. It's very simple. That the arm brace in any configuration does not add to the operational characteristics and firing mechanism. Let me repeat that. The arm brace or the plunger, the tube with a brace, it doesn't add anything to the firing operational characteristics of the pistol. The only thing which assists in the operational characteristics of the pistol using the ATF's logic are converting it to a fully automatic weapon by adjusting the mechanism in the firing and the trigger, using a forced reset trigger, or using a bump stock, which is used to allow you to fire the weapon. Now, the average person who has spent some time with their weapon, their AR-15 or their AK-47, most people can, at a 30-round magazine, most people can fire off more than 200 rounds a minute. Load it, cock it, safety off, fire the rounds as fast as you can pull that trigger. The average Joe on the street doesn't need a fully automatic weapon. So, and what difference does it make? If there is something shouldered, it is to stabilize. And that's the key. They don't want you to be able to aim like a rifle. Well, the stabilizing brace was meant to go around Velcro around the arm, originally for handicapped persons. And if you're handicapped, you are exempt. So, is that a form of discrimination of the general public? Is that allowing other portions of the society to have these weapons without regulation, but not others? There's an argument. I'm not saying it's strong, but my strongest argument, and for you guys to think about when you're writing your senators or your representatives, is, listen, the bump stock, the arm brace, the surface area, however, the stock in whatever configuration does not add to the firing mechanism or operational characteristics of the weapon. It doesn't change that one bit. So that's what I would argue. So if any of you have any questions or want further consultation, you're always welcome to call me, Don Green, 702-409-8239. Again, we'll be at the gun show this weekend at the Lexus Park in Las Vegas, Nevada, and again in March of 2023. But we're going to do an update on this show once the comments are coming in and published in the Federal Register, and see how the ATF refers to those. In the meantime, please look at the regulation, consult with qualified, competent legal counsel. Don't try to interpret the law yourself. These regulations are myriad. We have spent probably 100 hours combing through every single page to try to find the bullet points for you today. It could have been done by the ATF in one page, but they're using hundreds of pages of justification, including citations to lower courts in the federal system and really skirting around the United States Supreme Court cases. Now, again, the agencies have the prerogative to interpret their own regulations based on the Chevron decision, which has been within the past 20 to 25 years. There is currently a case before the United States Supreme Court under consideration, which may alter, change, strengthen, or reaffirm the Chevron decision, which states in the bottom line that a federal agency has the right and has the obligation to interpret its own regulations according to how it interprets them. So, for example, the Bureau of Land Management can interpret how they're going to handle wild horses. Who's going to challenge that? The Department of the Interior can talk about yucca plants. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms can talk about explosives, grenades, rocket launchers. The Environmental Protection Agency can talk about smog regulations. And this is why the U.S. Supreme Court is going to probably take this case up. Again, consult with legal counsel. You're always welcome to call me, 702-409-8239. Again, my name is Don Green, and we want to thank the producers at Rigel Studios for allowing us to present this broadcast. Thank you.